Hi guys, Retromaniac here, and welcome back to another episode of Console Craze, where we take a look at not really the games that made a console great, but rather the system itself. And yeah, I kind of already went over this one back in my Happy Birthday Nintendo, which I originally meant to be NES, but whatever. And without further ado, let's begin. The NES originally came out in 1984, but it was released nationwide in 85. Some of the first games released for it, though, now, I can already hear you guys in the comments. Yes, I can hear your comments. But, Jay, about Retromaniac, wasn't the first game Super Mario Brothers? Not exactly. Some of the first games were games like Gyromite, and it's on the... I have a Mario Duck Hunt combo card, but Duck Hunt. And those were the original releases. They released another game called Stack Up, both of which are part of the Robot series, if you can read it right there. Because you need a certain accessory called Rob. Now, I don't own Rob yet because he's a relatively hard accessory to find these days. Well, now with the retro game collecting phenomena exploding, it became a lot harder to find accessories. Who knows? Maybe I'll find Rob one day. And if I do, I'll be extra happy. I've looked on eBay for like a full Rob set for just Gyromite because I haven't found Stack Up yet. One time I saw it for $300. Not a chance. If I'm having to pay $300 for something, I might as well get Rob, the NES, and a bunch of games. Maybe then I'd probably accept it. But even then, I don't have that kind of money right now. Let alone back then. Some of the early releases are known as the Black Box series. The Black Box series were the first games released for the Nintendo. Here are some standard Black Box games. These games I have right here are Black Box games, like the Mario Duck Hunt combo card. These were originally separate games that were part of the Black Box series, but they combined it into one, sold it at the NES, and there's your piece of heaven right there. But another one was Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. I have the Donkey Kong Classics, which has both of them. So that's a bonus. I've got 10-Yard Fight and Tennis. Two games I will never play. Unless my father goes, Jacob, you need to play some sports. I'll be like, I am. Up next we have Pinball. Now, I'm not usually a fan of pinball games being put on consoles, but this one's, it's okay, but it's not the best. If you want to play a decent if you want to play a good pinball game on a console, then go play Sonic Spinball, I guess. Oh, Mario isn't around. Speaking of Mario Brothers, based off the classic arcade game where Mario's brother Luigi first appeared. And then we're back to Gyromite. The NES did great that year. Well, those 2 years. It was widely popular. And, its controller has been, it's been so popular, its controller that it came with, it has been plastered on everything. Hats, mugs, I'll show you that right here. Backpacks. I'm going to use that to carry my NES around. And yeah, as you know, it's the standard D-pad, which Nintendo first created, and originally it wasn't on the NES, it was on their old Game & Watches. That's where the D-pad first ever came in. But yeah, you got your standard B and A button, and start and select, and then the D-pad. Very simple, very basic. Not as simple or basic as like an Atari joystick where it's just the joystick and a button. But don't worry, Atari rectified that situation with plenty of accessories with complicated buttons. But we'll get to that another day. Yeah, simple. It's gorgeous. Now you would have thought that there probably weren't, like, yeah, there's quite a lot of games, but there probably wasn't that many, right? This isn't even half of it. This is like a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of NES games. Heck, this isn't even all of them. These are all the ones that I think are good enough to talk about, whereas the rest of them are either garbage or games I barely know how to play. Like a game called Deja Vu. Of course, we got our standard Game Genie. Now, the Game Genie is a neat little thing. Like, per se, you want, like, extra lives or something like that. Extra lives, a higher jump or something in Super Mario Brothers. Well, it's simple. What you do is you take the Game Genie and you connect the cartridge to it. It has little instructions on it on the back somewhat. And then you insert it to the NES. But I never really thought that would work too well because I can't really go in there and show you, but the way they made it, like, the part where it touches the chip, it's sort of like this. But the way they have it, because they built it to make it look like a VHS player, you know, something that we Americans are accustomed to. So you have to push down on it when you put in the game. Now, because of that, it pushes down and then goes back up, and it, over a while, bends it to where it can't even touch the game. But yeah, as you know, you push down. The Game Genie, though, it probably worked back then because then again, back then NESs were probably a lot more clean and everything and fixed. But you put it in, can't. I have a feeling this thing's gonna fall on top of me. But then, yeah, there were lots of classics like Adventure Island. That's always fun. There were lots of games that were on Game Boy that eventually went to NES, or vice versa. Like Tetris and Dr. Mario. Now, those are some fun games. If you find it for anything, pick it up and play it. But, back then, there was one thing that everyone loved to do. Advertise. And what's the best way to advertise what you have? Well, you put it with what the kids are doing that day, those days or whatever. And what better way to do that than to do it on NES? So, as you can imagine, they put a lot of movies and TV shows on NES. Now, for some of them, it's not that bad. Like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, that was a very popular thing back then. Heck, even I watched some of the old cartoons, and I love it. So that's the game is. I can see why people like it, and I can see why people hate it. Me personally, I'm sort of in the middle. It has good aspects, but it's got some serious flaws that really need to be ironed out. So yeah, that was a pretty cool idea. And well, on paper it sounds nice. Ghostbusters. Like, you should be able to go around and zap ghosts or whatever and capture them, and it would have been a phenomenal idea. But, like most games that were based off of movies or TV shows, they'd find a way to mess it up. Krusty's Funhouse. Yeah, Krusty from The Simpsons. The game involves you being Krusty, going around catching mice in Krusty's Funhouse, which is filled with weapons that hurt you. Now, doesn't that just sound like a great idea? No, it doesn't. Dick Tracy, I could see why it would be a good idea. And yes, Dick Tracy. Based off that Disney movie. Like, I had a pretty decent idea, I guess, but it'd be a bit tricky unless you're very imaginative. Now, they messed that one up. Now, one that they didn't mess up. Now, there's this old show called DuckTales, and I watched it, and let me tell you, I can't get that theme song out of my head. It was it's a fun game. It's considered up there as one of the great classics. There's actually a sequel, but it's rare as heck. But then there were ideas that really just didn't make sense, like Roadrunner. Now the reason why it's a black cartridge, well, I'll get right to that. Top Gun was a good idea, but they messed it up. And one idea, as I said before, that just made no sense whatsoever. Friday the 13th. Yeah, R-rated slasher films on a console for kids. I sense genius! That wraps up all the pop culture things. Well, I guess there is this game in here. It's called Commando, but it's not based on the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Yeah, there it is. Commando. Not based off Arnold Schwarzenegger, but yeah, it's a fun game. Fun as heck. I gotta play that. I'm gonna play that actually after I'm done with this. Alright. And then the rest of these seem to be classics. But before I do that, let me tell you all about one thing. These black Tengen, or Tengen, I'm not really sure, cartridges. Now, really, this isn't Nintendo or anyone else. Tengen isn't even really a company. Wanna know who it was? Wait here. That's right, it was our good old friend Atari in disguise. They saw the success of the NES. Because originally Nintendo wanted to give their console to Atari, but Atari felt like they were doing so great. Then the video game crash happened. Oh yeah, they did great. So if you find a black cartridge, these games, they're not necessarily rare by any means. Like Pac-Man's probably as common as dirt. But yeah, they're just from a different company. You'll have a problem getting it to work on your NES, I think. But if you get the top loader, you'll be fine. And check it out. Pac-Man's the same way as he is in that Pac-Man TV show from back then. I watched that show a little bit when I was younger. It was good for like little kids, but no, it's just not the best. Then, as you know, the NES had many classics, like obviously the Super Mario Brothers and such. But there are also many other classics that you all know and love. Like, yeah, most of what's left. Kirby, yeah, the pink guy. Remember? That's a fun game. It originally started off on the Game Boy, but then they made one for the NES. Now, the NES is nothing like the Game Boy version. The Game Boy version is quite short, but it's still really fun. The NES version is a lot longer, a lot more gorgeous looking, honestly, because it was a later release game. Because Kirby came around the time the NES was like dying out, because the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis were already out by the time this game was made. So nobody wanted the NES. But those who still had it got the treat of playing Kirby. But then Kirby Superstar and such like that came out, and yeah, this game became Ninja Gaiden. Back then people called it Ninja Gaiden. Mainly because of the AI in it. But yeah, Ninja Gaiden. And Castlevania by Konami. Now this is a fun game, but severely difficult. Ninja Gaiden and Castlevania, both really difficult, but still fun. How about Metroid? Now that's another one. And then, yeah, then we got Dragon Warrior, a great RPG game, but I'm just not that good at RPGs. And last but not least, I'm holding two of the greatest NES games in existence. Those being Super Mario Bros. 3 and The Legend of Zelda. Look at it. It was so good that they're like, you know what, let's give it a gold cartridge, because it's The Legend of Zelda. It's beautiful. Look at that. It glows onto the table, or at least in the camera it doesn't show here. But oh well, it's The Legend of Zelda. If you can find any way to play it, I demand that you pick it up and play it. The games here that I have left are the not so popular, but back then people just sort of accepted it for what it was, because there was only 2 games out at the time. That being Super Mario Bros. 2, a copy off of Doki Doki Panic for the Nintendo Famicom, which was the original NES, released in, like, 82, I think, yeah. In 82, the Famicom came out in Japan. But then they changed it to make it look like our familiar NES. So that way we would like it a bit better because, you know, it looks like a VHS player. Plus, when they released it, they marketed it as a toy because it came with a robot that you're able to control. These last games are sort of a mixed bag. Some good, some bad. Like 3D World Runner, phenomenal game. I was actually about to make a review about it, but it just sort of stopped. I might go back and finish it, or I might make something else. Now this game, if you want to know about it, go watch my review. It's Ghosts and Goblins. I did that one around Halloween. And the last games are World Class Track Meet, which I'll get to in a second. Ivan Iron Man Stewart's Super Off-Road, which is a 4-player NES game. I gotta talk about that one too, because you'll see. And Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, the hated Zelda sequel, because it is a side-scroller, plus it's severely difficult. It's still good, but by no means is it the first Legend of Zelda. Now, time to get to a bit more of the nitty-gritty, which you'll see in a sec. So why did I hold these games off to the side? Well, because if you look on them, there's stuff like a power pad and something about 4 players. But how can there be 4 players when there's only 2 ports? Well, let me show you. I have box of accessories. These are all some of the great NES accessories that came out, and the not so great, that everyone loves and doesn't love. That they use to play their games to seem hip and radical. Please don't hate me for using old terms like that. So we got things like, this isn't really much of an accessory, this is actually the first controller I ever had with it. It's a regular NES controller, but the buttons were changed. So instead of black for the D-pad and red for the buttons, it's changed up. I got this. I was only 1 controller, the NES, the Mario Donkey Kong Combo Card, Mario 2, and the Donkey Kong Classics. That was all I had, but I played the heck out of it because it was awesome. Plus, I had an older TV. Why? Well, I'll explain. But then, stuff like this. Turbo controllers. Rather than pressing the button repeatedly and wearing down your thumb, you just hold down a turbo button, and it's great. The NES Max is considered one of the great NES controllers, because it fits nicely in your hand, and rather than rubbing your thumb all over the D-pad, instead it's got this little disc thing that you just slide around, and it's nice. I use it occasionally, but mostly I use a standard NES controller. The Nintendo Zapper, or as I like to call it, my trusty Pixel Pistol. This sucker. Boom, boom, boom. Shooting ducks and duck hunt. Now I can't play it anymore because I have a flat screen. Now you may be wondering, well, what's stopping you? Well, zappers only work on older TVs that have more of a round screen. If you know what I mean, just an older model TV. One of those that you see in your grandparents' basement and go, oh my god, you watch TV on that? I gotta find a way to play the Zapper again. But yeah, as for turbo controllers, this is the NES Advantage. A huge arcade joystick controller. It has a 1 and 2 player thing, because you plug them both into the NES, and then you would, when your turn is over, switch it to 2, and you hand it off to your friend. You know, I dare someone to play Contra, another great NES game, with the advantage 2-player mode. There's also a slow-mo button, but honestly, it was kind of like the turbo button, except it clicks, so it stays that way, but all it really does is just pause and unpause repeatedly. Okay for some games like maybe Ghosts and Goblins, or something where it just like pauses and it just stops. Whereas in something like The Legend of Zelda, when you push the start button, that little screen comes down that shows you your inventory and such. So yeah, unfortunately it doesn't work for games like Legend of Zelda. But yeah, it's very nice, and I usually use this one a couple times. I use it almost as much as a standard NES controller, but what you gonna do? The QuickShot joystick controller, yeah, joystick. It has suction cups so you can stick it to a surface and sit there and play. And the B and A buttons are up here on the top, and the start and select button are down here, along with a turbo on auto fire, or basically turbo, which you can click on or off. Now this is almost the complete package, but there's a problem. The length of the controller. You know what? Hang on, let me test something. It's about the same length as an Atari 2600 controller. Then there's the Nintendo NES 4-Score. This allows the 4-player action that I was talking about with the World Class Track Meet game, which is right here. No, wait, not World Class Track Meet. What am I, stupid? Nah, it's for the Super Off-Road game. So that's always cool. Now, about World Class Track Meet, what you needed for that was the handy-dandy power pad. Now, this is a lot bigger. Let me undo this. Yeah. You'd step on this and you'd be able to run in the game. Or there's also a dance aerobics one, which is also on my shelf. I am not touching that. I just got it because, well, power pad games are relatively hard to come by. So, might as well pick it up while it's still there. There's also another side, which sort of reminds me of Dance Dance Revolution. So that's awesome. But, like most accessories, you know what they did? They made a few games for it, and then with that they said, goodbye! And they never used it. Ever again. That covers up most of the accessories. Except for one. I'll turn this out of the way, because this thing needs some space. I present to you all the Power Glove, aka Nintendo's biggest mess up. First of all, the question that is most commonly asked, why would you have a glove or whatever to play a game? And what makes even less sense is that there's a standard control pad on here with a D-pad B and A button. Yeah, so in case you feel like being a rich snob and not wanting to use a regular controller, you get to go, look at me, I've got a glove. You suck. Oh. Now put it on for you. Yeah. That's rad. You know what else is rad? Playing Rad Racer with the Power Glove. That. I love the Power Glove. It's so bad. As Lucas said in that movie, The Wizard. Even though that was a big lie and the Power Glove failed. And now, unfortunately with my Power Glove, I got this from one of my mom's friends. And they found it in their basement, and the other half basically is like this thing you put around your TV. So that way when you move your arms, flick your finger, or grab like that. Yeah, it's back at their house, and I just need to go there and go get it. But yeah, I also want to play Punch-Out with this thing. I had Punch-Out, but I got rid of it because it wasn't working. But in turn, I got Castlevania and Yard's Revenge for Atari. Well, Castlevania for NES. Castlevania even be put on Atari? I'll have to try that one day. Eventually, as times changed, like I said, eventually the NES was gotten rid of because Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis were out. Well, in case you weren't able to afford the Super Nintendo, they released this. The top loader. I got the top loader much later because eventually my gray box stopped working because, like I said, the way they made it just sort of sucked. But with that came some drawbacks. One of the good sides is you're able to play these unlicensed games like the Tengen carts, and there was also Baby Blue cartridges and such. Yeah. Well, you can play it on this, not this, because this had a lockout chip. But the drawback is you can't, like, you can use like coaxial or RF as they call it, but this had AV. This doesn't, because this is a cheap budget version. Rather than having LED light down here to see, you know, like if the console was working or not, instead this was just a switch. Now, if you get this thing modified, it's great. Otherwise, it is not. It didn't do the best. But then again, this was during that time when the NES was about dead. Nowadays, if you're going to get an NES, I would suggest getting this more than this. Because, you know, with this, you can modify it and it works beautifully. And plus, like I said, it's a top loader. So, first of all, it reads the games a lot better because the pin connectors aren't as messed up. That's good. But then came the time where the NES died in 1995. The last official game released for it is a game called Wario's Woods. Now, I have Wario's Woods, but not on the NES. I have it on Super Nintendo. And then the last game ever released for it by a big company, not like a homebrew or whatever, was this game called Sunday Funday, a Bible game. Yeah. But with that aside, what is my total thoughts on the NES overall? I love it. I know many of you people have thought that I was just nothing more than a big Atari 2600 nut, mainly because most of my videos here on the channel is filled with Atari 2600. Yeah, I really like the 2600. But my first ever console that I ever inherited was the NES. Then I went after an Atari, but I think before or after I got the Atari, I got the Genesis. And then I got the 2600 eventually. And even then, like, it's over there somewhere. It's my Flashback 4, which is the first form of the Atari I owned. Yeah. But overall, the NES will always remain as one of my favorite consoles. With a great library of games, and lots of them having a difficult challenge, it always makes you come back for more. Long live the NES. And with that said, I'm the Retro Maniac. Thank you for participating in this episode of Console Craze, and yeah, that's about it. Take care, everyone.